I have been married to Lin Wen for 5 years. To everyone, I am the perfect husband. I've even been featured in gossip magazines. Everyone envies us. Yet no one knows, in this marriage, what role I truly play. For these 5 years, she has always been indifferent, neither warm nor cold. As for me, I gradually extinguished the passionate love that once drove me to pursue her. I know deep down in her heart, I will never be that person, the one who left her with unresolved feelings. So I asked for a divorce. I chose to leave. But a week later, she blocked me at the entrance of my new home. She looked at me, her eyes red. "Why don't you want me anymore?" she asked. Just this afternoon, as I got home, Secretary Jung messaged me, "Sir, President Lin has a social engagement tonight. She be home around 10:30. I stared at the phone for a while and replied, "Okay." By 10:30, she should have already had dinner. She probably had a few drinks too. All I needed to do was run a bath for her and leave her fresh clothes in the bathroom. After finishing these tasks, it was exactly 10:15. I thought for a moment, left a light on in the living room, and went to bed. In a daze, I seemed to hear the door opening, the sound of water splashing in the bathroom. Just as I was drifting into sleep, a scent suddenly filled the air beside me, warmth pressed against my slightly cool back. I turned my head in a daze, and her kiss landed precisely on my lips. She must have been a bit drunk. "Why are you going to bed so early?" she asked. She nuzzled against my ear. Though tired, she still clung to me, refusing to let go. "Oh well, every time she's drunk, it's like this. If I don't indulge her, she starts to whimper. Perhaps this is the only time she ever acts coy with me. Maybe only at this moment. Do I feel like I'm truly her husband? I can't refuse her." Thankfully, it was already late at night. She fell into a deep sleep in my arms, but I found myself unable to sleep. I got up and poured myself a glass of red wine, sitting alone in the living room. I stared blankly at our wedding photo on the wall. When would be the right time to bring up the divorce? I met Lin Wen in college. Back then, she was a radiant girl, from a good family, excelling in her studies. And beautiful too. She was practically flawless. Falling in love with a girl like her was a natural thing for me. Back then, I was thick-skinned enough. But unfortunately, after 2 semesters of chasing her and doing many foolish things, I still couldn't win her over. I remember it was a snowy day. I had made her favorite dessert with my own hands. I stood outside the girls' dormitory waiting for her, but all I got was a single sentence from her. "Chin Hao, stop coming to see me. I have someone I like." I had once refused to give up, thinking it was just an excuse to reject me. Until one day, by chance, I saw her with her beloved, Yi Fan. I watched as she carefully adjusted his collar, playfully touched his hair, and gazed at him with eyes full of love, smiling. She even gently stood on her tiptoes and planted a kiss. It was then I realized that Lin Wen could indeed love someone like this. But that person wasn't me. The news of Lin Wen and Yifan quickly spread across the school. The relationship between the goddess and the poor student made Yifan the subject of much controversy. Everyone believed he was just a man trying to climb up the social ladder by attaching himself to the Lin family. But Lin Wen always stood by his side. She even used her family connections for him and got involved in the school's gossip forums. But unfortunately, this intense love affair did not have a perfect ending. The reason for Lin Wen and Yifan's breakup, she never mentioned it to me. But I heard it was because Lin Wen wanted Yifan to marry her as soon as he graduated and become a live-in son-in-law temporarily. But Yifan refused. He said he didn't want to be a man who depended on a woman. He wanted to carve out his own path. Many people had seen the way they quarreled on campus. They would argue, make up, then argue again. Finally, on the day Yi Fan decided to return to his hometown to become a rural teacher, they broke up. Half a year later, the Lin family and the Chin family had a project collaboration. Lin Wen and I crossed paths again. Because of the project, we became reacquainted. Looking back now, I might have taken advantage of the situation. I continued to treat her well, just like years ago. I would share the insights I learned at work with her and engage in conversations with her. I would remind her to drink less during social gatherings, and I would always escort her home after every engagement. 3 months later, on a snowy night, she saw me shivering in the cold outside the company building. Suddenly, she walked over and asked, "Chin Hao, do you really like me that much?" I silently looked at her and nodded. Yes, I had always liked her. She smiled and said, "Then would you like to marry me?" When we first got married, I was full of passion for this marriage. In fact, I could say that for most of the past 5 years, I remained passionate about this marriage because I loved her. I once naively believed that the reason she proposed marriage to me was because she liked me too. So even when she rarely replied to my messages, even when I had to rely on Lin's secretary to know her schedule, even though, apart from our routine marital relations, we seemed to have no other intimate moments, it never extinguished my enduring love for her. She was an only child, destined to inherit the family business. While in my family, I had an older brother, so life was relatively easier for me. In the eyes of old Master Lin and the members of the Lin family board, they often made things difficult for her. Being so young, I knew she had always faced challenges, so after careful consideration, I gave up my role in the Chin family's management and joined the Lin family business. To help her manage the most chaotic branch at the time, I understood that as a woman, trying to secure her place in such a large company was anything but easy. So I tried to spare her from worrying about other matters. Even when I exhausted or sick, I never told her. Instead, she went to the hospital alone. Until that day, I accidentally came across a box. Inside, a document revealed that for several years, she had been anonymously donating money to a rural elementary school. The principal of that rural elementary school, in order to express gratitude to this anonymous benefactor, would write a handwritten letter every year after receiving the donation and have the relevant institution forward it. These letters were neatly arranged in the box, without a single crease out of place. Even the rural elementary school principal was Yi Fan, the one who would get up the next day after sleeping. I arranged for the maid to prepare breakfast in the kitchen. One suddenly walked up behind me, hugged me, and startled me. I turned around to look at her. "Are you going to have breakfast at home today?" She nodded. The maid was stunned, staring at me in disbelief. I awkwardly glanced at the ingredients in the maid's hands. In the past, I always had the maid prepare 2 servings of breakfast, whether she ate at home or not, because she always left earlier than I did. Every moment we could eat together, I cherished immensely. But recently, I stopped preparing for 2. It just felt like wasting food. "Then you should eat this first." I placed the egg roll the maid had made on a plate and handed it to her. She looked at the plate, her expression slightly changed. "Eat it while it's hot," I urged her. "I won't be going to the office later. I'll head directly to the supplier. I can grab something on the way." I put down the milk and turned to leave. "How?" She suddenly grabbed my arm, as if she wanted to say something but hesitated. I turned back and looked at her in confusion. Is something wrong? I asked as she stepped closer, wrapping her arms around my waist and tilting her head up. You seem to be in a bad mood lately. Is it because there's too much work at the branch and you're tired? She looked at me, asking with concern. Tired? Yes, I've been a bit tired lately. Because I've been thinking about the divorce. Feeling emotionally drained. I don't have any plans tonight. I heard from Secretary Jung that a new Michelin restaurant opened near the company. It's Cantonese cuisine, your favorite. Do you want to go together? I was stunned for a moment, confirming with her. You have time tonight? She nodded. For how long? She smiled. For a long time, plenty of time. Really? Of course. Great, then I'll come to the company to pick you up tonight. I hugged her, feeling much lighter all of a sudden. If she has time, that means we can finally have a proper conversation about the divorce tonight. However, I still didn't get to meet Lin Wen that evening. She didn't show up. At 5 p.m., just as I was leaving the supplier's place, I received a message from Secretary Jung. Lin Wen had something come up unexpectedly. She won't be able to have dinner with you. This kind of last-minute cancellation had happened countless times over the past 5 years. I was long used to it, so I changed out of my clothes and prepared dinner for myself. After dinner, I looked through a few quarterly reports from the branch. Then I picked up my phone, planning to relax by watching some short videos, and then I saw Wen in a popular local video. She wasn't alone. Yi Fan was with her. The two of them were sitting face to face. The background was the cafe on the first floor of the Lin Corporation building. The blogger must be an employee of the company. In the video, she excitedly narrated, "Look at the perks of our company. After work, you can run into our goddess boss and the famous educator Principal Yi. Having coffee together. Principal Yi is even more handsome in person than on TV. I really want to go up and ask for an autograph." The video was posted 5 minutes ago. The comments section was filled with praise. Beautiful boss and handsome teacher, such a great pair. So envious of the blogger. Is your company still hiring? I'd love to work there too. I silently watched the video for a while, then turned off my phone, so Lin Wen canceled on me because of Yi Fan. For some reason, even though I am her husband, I felt that her canceling on me for Yi Fan was just a normal thing. Even after 5 years of marriage, so what? In her heart, perhaps I never even compared to Yi Fan. At 9:30, Lin Wen finally returned home. What did you have for dinner? She walked over and sat beside me, surprisingly showing concern for my dinner. I didn't answer, just remained silent, then softly asked her, "Did you have something to do tonight? Because Yi Fan came?" She paused, seeming a bit surprised, and slightly, faintly angry. Who told you that? I shook my head. No one, I saw it on a video. She sighed lightly. How? I didn't tell you. Because I didn't want you to overthink. Don't worry, there's nothing between me and him. I made anonymous donations to his school before. Somehow, the news leaked out, so he brought a TV crew over to express his thanks. His schedule was tight, so I agreed to do a few interviews. She sat down beside me. We met at the company cafe. Many employees were there. How? She said, holding onto my arm. We've been married for 5 years. You should trust me by now. Shouldn't you? I should be able to make time tomorrow. Let's go eat at that Cantonese restaurant. Lin Wen, I suddenly interrupted her. I actually don't like Cantonese cuisine. I only said that because you liked it. and I wanted to have more meals with you. She paused, taken aback. We've been married for 5 years. Do you know what food I like? She didn't respond. Of course, she didn't know. She had never cared to know. For hours. I had been holding back my emotions, on the verge of bursting. I suppressed the urge to shout at her, but I still asked the cutting question. So you remember that Yifan likes black coffee? And croissants? But you don't know what your own husband likes to eat? How? She frowned. If you're unhappy with me, we can talk. But don't bring Yifan into this, as expected, with just one sentence. She couldn't take it. Tonight, I do have something to talk to you about. I took a deep breath. Turned to look at her. Let's get divorced tomorrow night. The air fell silent. For about a minute. At how Lin Wan's eyes widened. Do you know what you're saying? I know. Divorce isn't something to be said lightly. The air grew silent again. After a moment, Lin Wen suddenly stood up. Maybe my tone wasn't great just now. But just because I met with Yifan, you want to divorce me? I remained silent for a moment, feeling like she was missing the point. If I really wanted to cheat, I wouldn't do it this way. The way I handle things. We've been married for 5 years. You should understand me by now. She continued, yes. I do know her well. She has always been strong-willed. If she wants to do something, she would do it flawlessly. Whatever she sets her mind to, she would meticulously plan, ensuring success. But does she understand me? Has she ever loved me? After seeing that video tonight, the insecurity I felt during my student days, when facing Yifan, came rushing back. Everything is laid out in front of me. As long as she's with Yifan, Lin Wen will never truly see me. But as an adult, isn't it ridiculous to still be caught up in whether someone loves you or not? It seems absurd. I just feel that. After all these years of marriage, we're simply not suited for each other, and you could find someone better. Are we not suited? She instinctively reached out her hand. How for the past 5 years? You've been doing everything so well, but I don't want to continue anymore. I avoided her hand. Lin Wan's fingers grasped at the air. The agreement that I've already. How? She suddenly interrupted. Are you not happy? I've already explained everything about Yifan. I promise you, I won't have any further involvement with him. What more do you want? Her face darkened. If you insist on fixating on tonight's events, then you're just being unreasonable. You're a grown man. Why are you acting like a woman, clinging to this? The words I wanted to say were swallowed back down by her sharp retort. It seemed clear that tonight's conversation wasn't going to happen, maybe realizing her harsh tone. After a while, she softened her voice. I've been so tired these past few days. Please don't cause trouble for me. With that, she got up and went to take a shower. Watching her retreating figure, I softly said, "Good night." For dinner, I had spicy boiled blood curd. Her steps paused slightly. Do you know? That's actually my favorite dish. Really? The day after our divorce, I showed Chinyu the divorce agreement I had in my hands. His eyes widened like saucers. After all, since you and Lin Wen got married, the cooperation between the Chin and Lin families has strengthened significantly. I thought for a moment, since I'm going to get divorced, it's better to inform my brother in advance. If you could come back to help me at Chin Corporation, I would certainly be thrilled. But why have you suddenly decided to divorce? Though when you first got married, there was a bit of pressure on her side, wasn't there? But I thought the two of you seemed quite loving after marriage. My brother said as he swung his golf club. What are you talking about? What do you mean by a bit of pressure? My brother pinched the bridge of his nose, seeming to regret his slip of the tongue. 5 years ago, wasn't the Lin family in need of a large sum of money for cash flow? At that time, I saw how much you liked her, running to her place day and night. So when Lin Wen came to see me on behalf of the Lin family, I just gave a little hint. I stared at my brother in shock. What did you hint at? My brother awkwardly averted his gaze. I told her, if our families could become in-laws, then I'd definitely help with the funds. I stood frozen in place, feeling the blood in my veins turn cold and solid. Little brother, my brother said, looking at me with concern. What else? I asked, pressing my fingers against my temples. What else is there that I don't know? My brother hesitated. Big brother, I'm about to get divorced. What's left to hide? It's not a big deal. Just that on your wedding day, Lin Wen's ex-boyfriend showed up. I stared blankly at him. He said he wanted to see Lin Wen, but at the time, I didn't want any complications. So I told him you two were very much in love, and that Lin Wen probably wouldn't want to see him. I sent him away. He scratched his head. Since there were members of the Lin family present, I'm not sure if Lin Wen ever found out about it. That's how it was. That's how it really was. I had thought that the reason she wanted to marry me was because I had moved her, because maybe she had even grown to like me a little. But it turns out, this marriage was her way of enduring humiliation for the sake of her company, for the sake of the Lin family. The words she said to me on that snowy night 5 years ago. So that's what it meant, how? Did you like me so much that you had to force me into marriage this way? So she married me. But between us, she created a deep chasm. She never allowed me to cross that line. When we first got married, I would always enjoy sending her messages, wanting to take her out to have fun, to share every little interesting thing in life with her. But aside from matters related to the company, she rarely replied. When something came up, she would only have her secretary contact me. Gradually, I spoke less. I stopped bothering her so casually, even making Secretary Jung the primary contact. We had a normal married life. She would whisper softly in my ear, calling me a how over and over. I always thought this was proof of our affection. But when I brought up having children a few times, she always said she was too busy, that it wasn't the right time. Looking back now, it seems she never intended to have children with me. After all, I was just her husband. Nothing more. Last night she asked me. She promised not to have any further involvement with Yifan. What more did I want? Indeed, on the day we got married, she and Yifan had a chance to start over. But because of me, they missed it again. And perhaps they've missed it forever. What more could this sinner want? But when I first fell for her, this wasn't what I wanted. When she was with Yifan, although I envied him, but I never intended to be the third party, let alone break them apart. I liked her because I wanted the best for her, but she chose to punish me in this way, punishing me for 5 long years. I wandered aimlessly through the streets, unconsciously finding myself outside Lin Wen's company building. In my briefcase was the signed divorce agreement. I thought for a moment and sent a message to Secretary Jung, telling her I was at the company and here to see Lin Wen. I wanted a divorce. I didn't want to delay any longer. As I walked into the lobby, I unexpectedly saw Yifan. He was smiling and talking with the receptionist, hearing footsteps. He turned and saw me too. He looked thinner than he did in the video, and a bit darker than during our student days. Even though he was just wearing a simple jacket and jeans, He exuded confidence, maturity, and steadiness. "Long time no see," he nodded at me. I joined him in the cafe on the first floor. To my surprise, here, I could still find croissants and black coffee that tasted just like what we had in the school cafe. Such nostalgia. He smiled, still looking as fresh and handsome as ever. Student days were the best. He started telling me about what he had been through in the past few years. He was indeed very accomplished. After returning to his hometown to become a rural teacher, he helped many children who had dropped out of school. Now, the school was running smoothly, and he had become a well-known figure. "You're really incredible." I sincerely praised him. He smiled and said in things like this: "People only see the glamorous side." Actually, back then, I also had moments when I couldn't hold on. He lifted his cup, taking a sip of coffee. "On the day you got married, I came to find Linwan." I hesitated and didn't say anything. I was reckless and made the impulsive decision to break up, thinking I had the luxury of being loved. I heard her. But it wasn't until I actually became a rural teacher that I realized how big the gap between ideal and reality truly was. Many things were much harder than I ever imagined. There were so many times when I wanted to give up. In my darkest moments, I thought about abandoning everything and coming back to find her. "But then I heard you were getting married." "I'm really sorry," I said. He was taken aback. "I didn't know you came that day." He lowered his head, saying nothing. "I'm preparing to divorce Linwan." I told him. Yifan's eyes widened in shock. "Don't joke around." He suddenly laughed. "Over the years, I've often seen you two in the media. People always praise you as the perfect couple." "It's true," I replied. "Can I ask you something?" He quietly asked. "Why are you getting divorced?" I shook my head. "Why else?" "Because I'm tired." I too wish there was someone who would let me be reckless, knowing I was loved. Just then, a familiar voice suddenly came from the cafe entrance. Ahow! Yifan and I turned our heads at the same time. It was Lin Wan. She quickly walked over. As she approached and saw Yifan, she seemed to freeze for a moment, then frowned as she looked at me. "Why did you suddenly come here?" Looking at her expression, I immediately understood. She probably thought, "I came here today specifically to cause trouble for Yifan." When Yifan also stood up. "It's my fault for intruding again. I have a few educational charity projects, like the one I mentioned to you last time. I happen to have some time today, so I wanted to discuss them with you." "Alright, I'll have my secretary take you upstairs." With that, Linwen called over Secretary Zhang, who was standing at the door, and had her escort Yifan away. I thought she would follow him upstairs, but to my surprise, she remained standing there, looking at me. I was a bit puzzled. Was she planning to send Yifan away so she could confront me in public right here? I'm still her husband after all. Isn't this favoritism a bit too blatant? And isn't this too inappropriate for the setting? I had no choice but to rub my temples and start explaining. "Lin Wan, it's not what you think." "How, are you feeling unwell?" I was taken aback, not quite understanding. She stepped closer and took my hand. "Why do you look so pale?" "Your hands are freezing." Employees passing by started to glance our way, accompanied by whispered conversations. Suddenly, I realized the reason for her unusual behavior. Lin Wen and I rarely appeared together in private settings like this. She was probably worried that I might confront Yifan inappropriately, so she sent him away first. Then, in front of the employees, she put on a display of affection to prevent any rumors that might harm Yifan from spreading. As for me, I didn't really care. After all, we're going to get divorced, so playing along with her and Yifan isn't a big deal. Besides, if I don't make things difficult for them, the divorce process might go more smoothly. With that thought, I lifted my head and smiled. I'm fine. You and Principal Yi still have things to discuss, right? I'll be leaving now. With that, I pulled my hand away, picked up my bag, and was about to leave, but she stopped me. Where are you going? She pulled me closer, then suddenly reached out and touched my forehead. Ahow, you have a fever. I'll take you to the hospital. Without giving me a chance to refuse, Linwen dragged me to the car. I actually found it quite unnecessary. Let me drive, I said when we were together. I would always drive so she could rest a bit more. You're sick. I'll drive, she insisted. I thought she was just finding an excuse to get me out of the company. But to my surprise, she actually drove me to the hospital. It turned out to be nothing serious. My temperature was normal. Just, how long has your husband had low blood sugar? The doctor asked Linwen. Linwen hesitated. A few years, I answered myself. Family members need to pay more attention. The doctor said as he wrote in my medical record. You should always have some candy on hand for him. This condition can be mild or severe. In addition to palpitations and fatigue, it can also lead to fainting in severe cases. Lin Wen nodded. Okay, I'll make sure. I'm really fine, I said, feeling that the situation was being blown out of proportion. I've always carried candy and snacks with me for years. After seeing the doctor, I wanted to leave as soon as possible, but Linwen kept asking the doctor about all sorts of precautions. It was as if she suddenly became very interested in this low blood sugar issue. After leaving the hospital, on the way to the parking lot, Linwen held onto my arm tightly the entire time. After the ordeal at the hospital, I actually started to feel a bit dizzy. Once I got into the car, I fished a piece of candy out of my briefcase, unwrapped it, and popped it into my mouth. The atmosphere in the car was heavy, so I simply closed my eyes. I wasn't sure how long we had been driving, but finally the car stopped. The air was silent. After a long pause, she suddenly asked softly, "Why have you never told me?" I looked at her in confusion, not understanding what she was asking about feeling unwell. It must not have been the first time, right? She had parked the car by the side of the road. Why didn't you tell me before? I did, I said, keeping my eyes closed. What? She straightened up a bit. When we first got married, there was a week when you came home late every day. On that Friday, I had low blood sugar, and while driving home from the branch office, I suddenly felt dizzy on the road, so I quickly pulled over. I sent you a message, asked if you could bring me some candy. I smiled. You didn't reply. I guess you've forgotten by now. After all, I sent you so many messages back then. It's normal to forget. And there was another time, this one you should remember. We were doing a magazine interview together. The reporter accidentally knocked my briefcase off the couch. As a result, the candies inside spilled out. The reporter suspected that we had a child in secret, but hadn't announced it. The questions during that interview were quite tricky. You weren't happy about it. After the interview, you specifically told me not to keep so many useless things in my bag. Why didn't I say anything? Because you never gave me the chance. And I was afraid that this little flaw of mine would become an excuse for you to dislike me. You don't like candy, so I kept it in the inner pocket of my bag, so you wouldn't see it anymore. You wanted to become the head of the Lin family, so I did my best to help you achieve that dream. How? She suddenly grasped my hand. I actually found a Sichuan restaurant and was planning to take you there tonight. Her hand seemed to tremble slightly. But you're not feeling well. Let's eat something light tonight, okay? I shook my head. I'll just have some porridge at home. You don't need to stay with me. Hurry back to the company. How? I have time tonight. She insisted. I couldn't help but gently remind her. But Yifan is still waiting for you at the company. The vice president can handle that. I looked at her in surprise. So you really are free tonight? She nodded. Yes, I'm free. I thought for a moment. If you're free, then let's just go home. Okay, she nodded again. A hint of joy flashing in her eyes. Okay, let's go home. My mood lightened up as well. Then when we get home, we can have a good talk about the divorce. For the rest of the drive, Lin Wen didn't say a word. She's actually quite perceptive. From last night until today, I think she's already realized that I'm serious about the divorce. After arriving home, I calmly took out the divorce agreement. I spent a month preparing this. I believe I've considered every point. Our divorce shouldn't impact the Chin and Lin families. I'll step down from the management of the Lin family's branch office. If there's anything else you want to add, you can add it. We can discuss it. She silently looked at the divorce agreement. Without saying a word, I sat across from her. I know you're busy, so I wanted to prepare everything thoroughly before bringing it up. This way, we can settle it quickly and not waste each other's time. I disagree. She suddenly pushed the agreement back. Turning her head away, I was taken aback. Which part do you disagree with? I opened the agreement, thinking it might be about the stock ownership. I've already made the biggest concession on this. If I push further, I'm afraid my brother's side will have issues. She suddenly reached out and pressed the agreement down. How? I don't agree with the divorce. She looked at me, speaking each word clearly. We locked eyes. Her expression seemed very serious. Why? I asked, and then suddenly realized. Is it because you think I've managed the branch well over these 5 years, and you're worried your next husband might not do as well, and that people will criticize? You don't need to worry about that. As long as he's willing to put in the effort, he'll do fine. After thinking for a moment, I went to the bookshelf and took out 5 notebooks. These notebooks contain notes on handling matters within Lin Corporation, as well as dealing with the media, supplier contact information, and details about the branch's personnel and structure. Don't worry, I can hand all of this over to you and to your future new husband if he ever needs help. He can always come to me. How? She suddenly raised her voice, her eyes turning even redder. I looked at her in confusion. What do you take your marriage for? And what do you take me for? Just another one of your tasks? I didn't say anything. I just turned my head to look out the window. How could it be just a task? It's precisely because I valued this marriage so much that I worked so hard to make everything right for her. But what's the point of saying this now? She grabbed my hand, which was resting on the table. You need to understand. We're not just work partners. We're husband and wife sharing the same bed. But besides sharing a bed, there's nothing about us that feels like a real marriage. She paused for a moment. The number of times we've had dinner together each month can be counted on one hand. The messages I've sent to you are less than a fraction of those I've exchanged with Secretary Zhang. I don't know how other couples live, but I know I no longer want a marriage like this. I gently pulled my hand away. Ziwan, I've actually thought a lot about this recently. In this marriage, you haven't done anything wrong. I was the one who pursued you, and I was the one who wanted to marry you. For the past 5 years, you haven't cheated. It's me who's held onto unrealistic fantasies about this marriage. living like. This isn't impossible, but I feel that in life, we should be with someone we love and who loves us in return. After all, being with someone you love would make you happier too, right? She stared at me, stunned. Someone I love? She asked, still dazed. Who do you think I love? I shook my head. I don't know. But whoever it is, whether it's Yifan or someone else, it's not me. The next morning, I moved out of our home. I returned to an apartment I had bought before we got married. The night before, we sat quietly across from each other for a few minutes. Then Linwen got up to take a phone call and left the house. She didn't come back for the rest of the night. She took the divorce agreement with her. I assumed she had agreed to the divorce. After all, it wouldn't cost her anything. The wedding ring on my left hand was the only gift Linwen had given me in the past 5 years. Before I left, I took off the ring and placed it on the bedside table. Just as I finished packing, I received a call from my brother. What's going on? Why did Linwen call me early this morning asking what kind of candy you like? My brother's voice was filled with confusion. What's going on? Are you to playing house? Are you really getting divorced or not? I hesitated for a moment. Yes. Big brother, I thought for a moment. Isn't there a small media company in our family that isn't doing too well? He cleared his throat. It's been years. And it's never been profitable. I'm planning to cut our losses and shut it down. Give it to me, will you? I said, holding my phone, gazing out at the vast blue sky. All right, he agreed, sure. Later that evening, I received a message from Lin Wan, something that had never happened before. Shall we go to the party together tonight? I stared at my phone, feeling momentarily dazed. This kind of message. In the past, it was always Secretary Zhang who sent it to me. Let's go our separate ways. Let's proceed with the divorce. I'll move out during this time. I won't be staying at home anymore. There was no reply after that. Indeed, this was the logical outcome. But an hour later, when I went downstairs to drive, I saw Lin Wan. I didn't know how long she had been waiting there. She looked exhausted, with bloodshot eyes. I had never seen her in such a state. What are you doing here? Her eyes seemed to light up a bit. She quickly walked over, grabbing my hand, but then suddenly stopped. Where's your ring? I took it off. Why aren't you wearing it anymore? Her voice carried a hint of urgency. We're going through the divorce process. There's no need for it anymore, right? Chin, how? She raised her voice. I haven't agreed to the divorce yet. I don't understand. You didn't say no last night, did you? You took the divorce papers, didn't you? She looked at me for a long while. And suddenly, tears welled up in her eyes. Not saying no means I agree? She hugged me, her voice trembling with sobs. I don't want a divorce. Lin Wen said she didn't want a divorce. I had previously imagined countless obstacles on the road to divorce, like my brother, or the handover of the branch company's management, or the division of assets. But I never anticipated that I would stumble at the very first hurdle. She didn't want to lose me. It was simply unbelievable. Why don't you want to? Isn't this the best thing for both of us? She paused for a moment, just about to speak, but was interrupted by the sound of a car horn. It turned out that her car was blocking someone else's way, with no other choice under the urging. We both got into her car together, heading to the party. But as soon as I sat in the driver's seat, I noticed something was off. The car, which was usually spotless, now had one shopping bag after another on the back seat. I bought some candy. She said softly, there's more in the glove compartment. In the future, if you don't feel well, don't just keep it to yourself, I said, and she added, I've also placed some around the house. I found a couple of good Sichuan and Hunan restaurants. If there's anything you want to eat, even if it's spicy, I'll eat it with you. I'll also learn how to cook. I'll start coming home earlier from now on, so we can have dinner together. On weekends, we can go to the movies or to the amusement park if what bothers you is about Yifan. I can explain that too. The company has indeed been involved in educational charity work all these years. But I wasn't the one who decided which school to choose. It was the result of a comprehensive assessment by the office that they chose Yifan's school. I didn't expect it either. I only found out about it recently as well. I know you might have seen those letters. Actually, they've always been kept by the office. I only saw them a few days before you did. It's just because the old man was recently. Somehow, he found out about the thank you letters, so I asked the office to organize them, planning to bring them back for him to see over the weekend. Croissants and black coffee. She felt wronged about personal matters. The current employees at the company's cafe used to work at the school cafe. When he lost his job, I arranged for him to work here. Yifan once worked at the school cafe too, so she remembered him, and also remembered his preferences. Maybe I had a bad attitude that night, which led to your misunderstanding, but I truly believe he's just someone from the past. A person who has nothing to do with us, even someone insignificant. Lin Wen, how? She interrupted me. Can you just listen to me, please? I thought about it all night last night. In this marriage, I truly haven't done well enough. But I can change. Knowing one's mistakes and correcting them should still give us a chance. By the time we arrived at the party, I still felt a bit dazed. After politely greeting a few acquaintances, I wanted to get some fresh air, so I went to the balcony. Who would have thought I'd meet someone familiar there? Li Chin, my childhood friend. I walked over. Well, if it isn't the universally praised perfect husband. She looked at me, raising an eyebrow with a smile. Long time no see. This girl still had a way of rubbing people the wrong way with her words. How have you been? I knew she was Li Jia's illegitimate daughter, and that her situation with Li Jia wasn't great. I'm doing fine, she said, pulling out a cigarette, and handed me one. Want one? I hesitated for a moment. Forget it, if I get photographed, it'll be a hassle. After all, in the media's eyes, I don't smoke. How boring, she scoffed, pointing to the vast forest outside the balcony. If someone were really hiding there to take pictures, I'd swallow the entire forest for you. Do you believe me? I couldn't help but laugh, though there was a bit of frustration in my heart. Fine, give me one. Now that's more like it. When I saw you earlier, I thought you were depressed. I smiled. It's just that I haven't had much work lately. She nonchalantly responded with a hum. Li Chin, have you ever thought about joining my little company? I knew she had always had a talent for design. What's going on? Aren't you still with the Lin Corporation? You're not going to be the man behind Lin anymore? She raised an eyebrow, but I didn't feel like arguing with her. I picked up my phone and sent her the company's details. The company is still in its early stages, so the salary isn't great, but I hope you'll consider joining. Got it, she yawned. But her gaze suddenly shifted past me. Looking towards the door, I turned around. It was Lin Wen. My first instinct was to quickly put out the cigarette. Lin Wen didn't like the smell of smoke. She walked over, frowning as she glanced at Li Chin, then looked at me. Why are you smoking? It's bad for your health. Li Chin looked at me, then back at Lin Wen. You didn't know he smokes? Li Chin suddenly spoke up. He's always smoked. Lin Wen froze. Li Qin walked up to her, smiling as she patted Lin Wen on the shoulder. You've been married for 5 years, right? Do you really know what kind of man your husband is? You don't know him as well as I do you? Li Qin left, leaving behind a pale-faced Lin Wen and me. I only felt a headache coming on. Don't misunderstand, I said. I didn't mean to hide it from you. These past few years, the branch company had so many issues that your few academic advisors even got involved, causing quite a bit of trouble at the start. Sometimes, when I was frustrated and tired, I'd smoke a bit at home alone. After explaining, her face became even paler. Thinking for a moment, I added, we checked earlier, Li Qin and I. No one was there to take secret photos, so you don't need to worry about any PR issues. You think what I'm worried about is someone catching you smoking on camera? Her eyes started to well up with tears. I was stunned for a moment. Isn't it? She lowered her head. How? I've really disappointed you, haven't I? I hesitated, not really sure how to respond. Disappointed, of course, there's some. The more you once hoped, the more disappointed you become. But after enough disappointment, you get used to it. Now that we've already decided to get divorced, what's the point of bringing up unnecessary accusations? I shook my head. No, there's none of that. Now that the branch company is on track, I don't smoke much anymore. So you can talk to Li Qin about your stress, but not to me? I was taken aback. If I must talk about it, would you be willing to listen? She nodded. My only pressure right now, I looked up seriously, is whether our divorce process can go smoothly. And if it could be quicker, that would be even better. At this, Lin Wan's whole body started trembling. I felt utterly helpless as well. Clearly, she was the one who insisted I say it. After a long moment, she walked over and hugged me, her voice buzzing. Anything but this. From that point on, Lin Wen seemed to change a lot. Although, I still insisted on stepping down from managing the Lin Corporation's branch and took over the Qin family's media company. I kept receiving various gifts from her at the new company, as well as homemade meals. And of course, she herself would appear from time to time. It was as if the roles had reversed. Like how I used to chase after her. Now everything seemed to have flipped around. The young employees at the company, unaware of my pending divorce, would speak highly of her, praising me for marrying such a great wife. Only Li Qin, ever since she joined my company, would see the things Lin Wen sent and give me a knowing smile, shaking her head as she did. A month later, the company had to prepare a bid proposal, and I pulled Li Qin along, working overtime for several days just to perfect a small detail. When we finally completed it, I relaxed my shoulders and looked over at Li Qin, noticing she too had a relieved expression. She used to be so nonchalant about work. I had never seen her so serious before. I couldn't help but laugh. Li Qin looked at me with a puzzled expression. I laughed as I explained. Suddenly, it feels like I've accidentally unearthed a treasure. Li Qin chuckled. It's my stupid pride that made me help you, okay? Alright, I said, knowing there was no arguing with her temper. Let's go, it's so late. How about I treat you to a late-night snack? Of course, that sounds great, she said. But isn't there someone who's supposed to be looking for you today? She paused, glancing toward the door. With a shrug, she added, see? What did I tell you? I turned to look, and standing at the door was Lin Wan. Li Qin lazily packed her bag, waved at me. I'm off now, don't forget, you owe me that snack. After Li Qin left, it was just Lin Wen and me in the office. She walked over silently, carrying a thermal lunchbox. Have you eaten? She asked softly. I have, I replied. There was a moment of silence, Lin Wan. I felt like there was more to say. But she suddenly threw herself into my arms, holding me tightly. I instinctively stiffened. Ah Wen, what's wrong? She didn't respond, just took a deep breath. The clock on the wall ticked away. I'm jealous. After a long pause, she whispered, how? I'm jealous. I never imagined that one day Lin Wen would hold me and confess that she was jealous. You asked me before why I didn't agree to the divorce. Do you know why? It's because I can't bear the thought of you being with someone else. Just now, when I stood at the door watching you smile at her, seeing you both so happy, the jealousy in my heart surged uncontrollably. I know very well that there's nothing going on between you and Li Qin, but I still felt insanely jealous. How? She buried her head in my chest. I'm really going mad. I lifted my hand and quietly held her. And you also asked me why I wanted a divorce. Is that right? She nodded. For 5 years, I've been someone else's husband, with my heart and mind full of my wife, only to turn around and realize I've lost myself. And another reason I want a divorce is because I want to be Qin Hao again. I want to live for myself. I gently pulled away from her. It's been 5 years, let's part on good terms, shall we? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I hesitated, then stepped away from her side. But unexpectedly, she grabbed my hand. Husband, double quotes, she paused. Just this once, give me one more chance, please. Her palms were burning hot. All right, I said softly. By the end of the year, if you can step down as the interim president, we won't get divorced. She froze. What? That's my only condition. She hesitated. This condition is too harsh for me. I shook my head, gently trying to pull my hand away. But she still wouldn't let go. There's only this one condition. Everything else is non-negotiable. But then she released my hand. I understand, she said, resigned. My brother was stunned for a moment, then burst into laughter, shaking his head. Impossible, right? Lin Wen stepping down? I'll take my head off and give it to you as a toy if she does. I knew the Lin family's situation was actually quite complicated. The old master of the Lin family had 2 sons, Lin Wan's uncle and her father. Initially, the old master intended to pass the company to the elder son's family. But who would have thought that Lin Wan's cousin would mess up, getting into trouble 6 years ago and ending up in prison? So Lin Wan had to take over Lin Corporation instead, but her other relatives, not respecting a woman in charge, often stirred up trouble within the company. Everyone was eyeing the position of president with greed. Over the past 5 years, I've helped her handle many such situations. After all, she was caught between a rock and a hard place. Lin Wan didn't grow up in the old Lin family mansion, so she wasn't particularly close to the old master. And with the old master's age, he sometimes couldn't distinguish right from wrong. For 5 years, she, as a woman, had to work incredibly hard to secure that position. I knew this better than anyone, so I was certain she wouldn't step down. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. After I said those words, Lin Wan never reached out to me again. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. I threw myself fully into my work, and the company's operations finally showed signs of improvement. Li Qin and the other employees were highly efficient. I could see that clearly. She had also changed quite a bit during this time. On New Year's Eve, the company held a small year-end party. We all had dinner and sang together. My brother came as well, Well done, little brother. Just as everyone says, you really are a business genius. As he said that, he started pushing his luck. Shouldn't you take on some of the group's responsibilities too? Dad's been dumping everything on me. And your brother here is about to collapse from exhaustion. Everyone was in high spirits at the party. Since I agreed to help him, my brother was especially excited, singing and dancing without any restraint. His usual image was nowhere to be seen. At 11 p.m., we all left the KTV together. And it just so happened to be snowing. A few of the more playful ones immediately started a snowball fight. Across the street, a shopping mall's big screen was playing a TV show. My brother stood behind me, shattering non-stop. A snowflake landed on my hair, so I raised my hand to brush it off. But then on the screen, I saw Lin Wan. She looked poised and graceful, giving an interview to a reporter. President Lin, may we ask why you suddenly stepped down from the Lin Corporation? Is there a special reason behind this? Lin Wan smiled calmly. There's no special reason. I just want to take a break and spend some time with my husband. I stared at the screen, stunned. I turned to look at my brother, who was just as dumbfounded. When our eyes met, he slowly raised his right hand and silently touched his neck, as if in disbelief. At that moment, my phone rang. Hello? Where are you? By the city center clock tower. I'll be there in half an hour. How? You better keep your promise, she said with a relaxed, smiling tone. Wait for me. At 11:45 p.m., I met Lin Wan beneath the clock tower. She walked towards me through the snow, steadily settling on her shoulders, her hair shimmering softly, like a dream. It wasn't necessary. We stood facing each other. I said, "You stepped down. There's no going back now. What will you do?" She shook her head, smiling lightly. If I can't go back, then I can't go back. I shook my head. 5 years of hard work. How can you just give it up like that? So reckless, I said, rubbing my forehead. She smiled, her eyes curving. So, you do worrying about me, don't you? She stepped closer. So, I still have a chance, right? Yes, she said, extending a stack of papers to me. It was the divorce agreement. I was taken aback, looking at her in confusion. These past 3 months, while handling the procedures for stepping down, I've been doing a lot of thinking. But I don't want to use this to force you to stay in this marriage. She paused for a moment. I've already signed the divorce papers. If that's the case, then why did you step down? I was even more puzzled. Business people don't make unprofitable deals. I'm confident that even if I leave Lin Corporation, I can build a new Lin Corporation from scratch. Starting over from the beginning is actually more challenging. She smiled. Besides, I wanted to trade this resignation for something else. Something else? I asked, still not understanding. She nodded, stood on her tiptoes, and gently brushed the snow from my hair. For a chance to start over with us. She looked up, I looked down, our eyes meeting. In her gaze, I saw a tenderness and love I had never seen before. For a chance for Lin Wan to pursue Chen Hao again. At 11:59 p.m., I signed my name on the agreement. From that moment on, I was no longer the perfect husband everyone talked about. I was just Chen Hao, just myself. The clock tower chimed in the new year, and Lin Wan and I looked up at the snow falling from the sky. Happy New Year, I sighed. Her eyes sparkled as she extended her hand to me. Happy New Year. Chen Hao, I'm Lin Wan. I looked at her and smiled. Happy New Year. Lin Wan, I said, reaching out my hand. I'm Chen Hao. And so, the story ends. The end.